Good evening, AP European History folks. This is my family.
Hi, my name is Ian.
Hi, my name is Ryan.
Hi, my name is Colin.
And you want students to?
Study hard!
All right. Thank
Love
you very
you.
much, gentlemen.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
See you, bud.
See ya.
Okay, folks, those are my kids. Wonderful Ian, Ryan, and Colin. It's Ian's birthday tomorrow. He's 10 years old tomorrow. Someone shut the door for me there, please. Thank you, Ian. What a good kid. It was brought to my attention that the videos that I had online really didn't do a very good job on the portion of the study guide after the first page. And so I checked it out, and that's correct. Some older videos there, a different Craig Holliday. So I want to pick up on the bottom of the first page and make our way as far as we can. Then we're probably going to need a second video here in order to get ourselves all the way to the end. Test Thursday, Friday, so get on it, ladies and gentlemen. All right, we begin here, ladies and gentlemen, with the French Wars of Religion, and religion and politics are the two intertwining roots of everything during this period. You can't avoid the influences and the motives of both of those. So let's have a look. In France, you have a royal family, the Valois, that is a Catholic family, but their claim to the throne is not ironclad. Other noble families, the Bourbon and the Guise, also have very strong claims to the throne. The Bourbon was a family from the south of France that had recently converted over to Calvinism, in order to try and disrupt the religious uniformity of France and try and get in the way of the ruling Valois family. The Guise family, on the other hand, had gone in the opposite direction. They were what we might call ultra-Catholics, and so their Catholicism was more closely held than the Catholicism of the Valois leading family. So you have three families here, each with a claim to the throne of the French, and each of them with a religious policy, if you will, that's different from the other. In 1572, during a wedding of the Bourbon and the Valois, the Guise family, who were the host family in Paris, with the cooperation of the Valois, staged a massacre. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre struck out at the Protestants, the Bourbon family, in an attempt to try and demolish the family and bring France to a policy of religious uniformity. This is the sort of thing Philip II would love. In fact, Philip II is financing this kind of an operation. Well done, Philip, trying to make sure that France goes the way of Spain with religious uniformity. Now, unfortunately for the Valois and the Guise, they don't get everything done there, and that sparks this War of the Three Henrys, which stretches on until 1589, when Henry Valois is killed in an assassination, which brings to the throne Henry Bourbon, who rules as Henry IV, sometimes called Henry the Good, Henry the Fair, Henry the Mac Daddy. No, I'm just kidding. Henry, a whole bunch of names, but Henry IV is the one that we know him best by. He issues in 1598 the Edict of Nantes, allowing tolerance and religious practice for Calvinists, a religion that he used to practice, but he personally transfers over to Catholicism. Henry's a politique, just like Elizabeth. He wants to show you that religion is not the most important thing in his universe. Politics and economic stability are much more important. We move to England. And in the early 1600s, we have a challenge for the throne of England. In 1603, James I, who had been the King of Scotland, rises to the throne following the death of Elizabeth I. Now, James is a divine right ruler from Scotland. He is not new at this. This is not his first rodeo, to take the phrase of the day. He knows what he's up to. And when he arrives in England, he intends to rule the country as an absolute monarch. He controls whether or not the Parliament meets. He is an Anglican, but he tends to lean a little bit towards the Catholic side, and that's not going to go along well with the Parliament. The Parliament in England, really representing the noble and the elite influences in society, tended to lean more towards the Calvinist side. So you've got the Calvinist-leaning Parliament and the Catholic-leaning king. You know you got a problem already. When the king eventually has to call Parliament, the Parliament is going to want something in return for the money that they give the king. What do they want? They want, for instance, required meetings every 3 years. They want the king to grant them more powers. All of these things turn into a tug of war. Under the reign of James's son, Charles, there's a long period of 11 years where Charles refuses to call the Parliament, In 1629, when he finally does, and they've been sitting waiting for over a decade. And they're going to want a lot. Unfortunately for Charles, that turns into a civil war that he loses, the Roundheads defeating him and his cavaliers, and it loses his head for him. So in 1649, the English take this radical step of removing their monarch and chopping off his head for treason. That's something that would have resonated throughout Europe. You don't disobey a divine right ruler because they're the agents of God, and you certainly don't then behead them. That would have sent shivers down the spine of just about everyone in Europe, except, of course, Charles I. Oh, ouch. Okay. How was the Commonwealth supposed to work? The Commonwealth was supposed to be a form of government that was new and different. No monarch, just the Parliament ruling by themselves. And in that sense, it was a society that was completely different. It was a disaster, though. Oliver Cromwell, who had led the army during the Civil War, makes a real gaffe of this. He refuses to rule alongside the Parliament. He dismisses them. He rules like a monarch. He relies on the army. You name it, he makes the mistake over the course of the 1650s. And by the end of the 1650s, the English are ready to call back the Stuarts, and they call back Charles's son, Charles II this time, to rule in 1660. More on that in our next unit. A bit of an anomaly in all of this is the Netherlands. Really small country sitting on the fringe of Europe. We saw them in our last page here because they were being defended by Elizabeth from Philip II. But once the Dutch, as we call them, are free of the Spanish, they go into what we call this Golden Age, a period for about 50 years where their religious tolerance, their strong business, huge fleet of ships, big belief in joint stock companies, all of those things combine in order to make them a viable power of the world. The Dutch have the best trading routes. They have a huge mercantile navy. They have an enormous sense of purpose. They're a very simple, Calvinistic people, right? Hard work, discipline, invest in the future, dress simply. Don't be flair-oriented, right? I made this point that you never want to go to Vegas with the Dutch. You want to go with Philip II. It's going to be a weekend to remember if you go with Philip II. With the Dutch, it's going to be bargain living, and we're not going to have any fun, okay? Flipping the page, it mentions the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch East India Company, the most successful joint stock company in the history of mankind. A ridiculously successful investment. If you had had the money to invest and then keep it in there over time, you'd be doing well. Okay, let's look at some other trade-based items here. The theory of mercantilism. Mercantilism is an economic system in which wealth is limited and that wealth is therefore competitively gained. If you really want resources and money, the only way to get it is to force your opponents in the world to buy things from you, and then you get their money. So in the acquisition of wealth, what you really want to do is get a lot of colonies. Get places with a lot of raw goods and have them spit out their raw goods. Sugar, cotton, indigo, rice, tobacco, all of these things that the Europeans would not have had themselves, but that they were willing to pay money in order to get. The countries that had the most colonies and therefore had the most ability to sell these goods would have fared very favorably in a mercantilist system. Those that did not would have been paying out constantly. As a monarch at home, you can practice mercantilism by tariffing or taxing foreign goods. You can subsidize local industries in order to encourage their growth. And in a general sense, you can try and focus on peace and stability, because doing that is going to help the middle class and encourage more trade. What's the price revolution? The price revolution is this gradual but definite uptick in prices in land and in food that's caused really by an overall growth of the population. The population continues to grow. The amount of resources does not continue to grow. And as a result of it, we have this general scarcity that's going to cause higher prices. Detail the improvements made by the agricultural revolution. The Europeans have been fairly bad farmers now for 1,000 years. They start to become a little more scientific in the use of waste as a sufficient fertilizer. They begin to use nitrogen-rich crops and crop rotation as a way of assuring that crops replenish the soil instead of depleting them. We begin to see the use of things like the seed drill. In England, the enclosure movement kicks a lot of local peasants off of the common lands, and as a result of it, makes sure that people have these huge plots of land where they can experiment. Now, what does that mean? It means the English are going to be making more food per acre than everyone else, and they're using less farmers to do it. As a result of that, we're going to free up farmers. And those farmers will then end up working in the cottage industries, spinning cloth, making yarn, making textiles of various types in their homes. When we realize that that's inefficient, as we will around 1650, 1700, we're going to start pushing them into factories. And the beginning of the Industrial Revolution throughout Europe is going to come in England because of those twin movements of the Agricultural Revolution and the Enclosure Movement. With trade happening more and more, people are headed into cities. Cities are getting more and more crowded. There's crime, there's sanitation issues. How did governments deal with this? Well, quite frankly, they didn't. They didn't think it was their problem. They didn't think it was something that they were supposed to deal with. Those were the sorts of things that private people took care of and individuals took care of. Governments were too busy taxing for armies and organizing for war and defending the frontier. We're not here to build sewers and trenches. That's a later concern. The importance of carnival and blood sports. The Europeans enjoyed a good time, and a good time often involved alcohol and violence. Not unlike 2015 society. I know that sounds weird, but we have a lot of those similar strains. Alcohol and violence came together for blood sports, whether that's bull baiting, bear baiting, chicken fighting, dog fights, boxing, gambling, drinking, all of which would have been important social activities to kind of let off the steam of European society. As well, carnival, a situation where the nobles and the peasants switched roles, at least in theory, for a weekend or so, gave people the opportunity to release any pent-up anger and have a little fun for a while. Let's talk a little bit about science for a while, and then we'll wrap up this video. Galileo's going to get in trouble because he's in Italy, and Italy is the backyard of the Catholic Church. You cannot, if you are Galileo, spend your time studying the stars and, at the same time, begin to support Kepler and Copernicus and their theories and hope that everything's going to be okay. You are slowly whittling away at the strength of the Catholic Church. You don't intend to be doing that, but that's what you're doing. As Galileo begins to make more observations and becomes more and more certain that Kepler, and Copernicus have things right, he's brought in by the church and questioned. He's forced to recant his theories. He's forced to say that Copernican theory is in fact a theory. It's a supposition. It's not a fact. And the rest of his life is spent studying inertia and movement and not the solar system. We see more positive scientific movements outside of Italy, like, for instance, Sir Isaac Newton's work in England, where he is going to study calculus and he is going to develop this idea of understanding universal force and gravitation. In his Principia, Newton gathers together all of the other great ideas of the scientists from his period in order to explain how the universe works in one uniform mechanical order. We're also looking inside of the body. Andreas Vesalius and William Harvey would have been involved in studies of the human body. It's Vesalius who reveals that it's the heart and not the liver that is the source of our blood flow. And then Harvey later on clarifies that there's one system of blood and not two. These are doctors, but let's not confuse them for people who would be in an ER today. They still had some pretty primitive ideas. And lastly, Bacon and Descartes are hugely significant for their understanding of how to develop a scientific method. It's Descartes' deductive reasoning, or a system of doubt, that allows us to use every moment of checking and doubting of information in order to make sure that our science is pure and it's well done. Thus ends that one. We'll have one more video.